is your economic review this morning. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage. These are the top headlines that we are waking up to this morning. We are joined by Reginald Kazitsu, who's going to help us understand exactly what it is that we're talking about this morning as concerns the weight of the money in your pocket and exactly how COVID-19 is shaping our economy outlook. Property owners are concerned about tenants' ability to pay rent in the long term. Meanwhile, uncertainty looms in the real estate sector as property owners in the office and retail arms are expressing concern over tenants' ability to pay rent in the near future. According to a survey by Knight Frank, 50% of the respondents indicated that the general uncertainty in the market was their greatest challenge in managing their real estate portfolios, followed by 30% who indicated that they were wary that tenants would not be able to pay their rent. Against this, 27% of respondents indicated that they have granted their tenants rent deferrals, while 33% have undertaken a renegotiation of lease terms in bid to ensure that tenants' businesses stay afloat. Now, in order to ensure continuity of business from both ends, 40% of property owners stated that they are likely to offer incentives to retain existing and attract new tenants, while 20% indicated that they definitely allow room for flexibility in the future. All right, let's listen in from Tilda Mwai, Knight Frank researcher, on this, and then after that we come back and talk about it.
Of course, the retail sector has been the most affected and the hardest hit. And according to our survey, our respondents expect that healthcare-related retail tenants and full-service restaurants are anticipated to be the quickest sectors to recover from COVID-19. And in order to survive the current pandemic, different accommodations have been sought by retail tenants, with 31% of our respondents reporting that rent holidays had been requested, while an equal percentage reported that a renegotiation of lease terms had been requested. Of course, general and market uncertainty continues to be the main challenge that most of the landlords are currently facing, although 30% of the respondents indicated that the current pandemic would not serve to deter them from investing in commercial office spaces. And with regards to adopting to a new normal, we see that 70% of the respondents already have a post-COVID reoccupancy strategy to ensure business continuity in place.
Yes, Reginald, I mean, we had to talk about this as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And my question to you this morning, even before we start looking at these numbers and making sense of them, is that why then didn't we have the rental income issue take priority in the cushioning of the economy from the government?
Just to answer that, rental income lies in the private space completely. So the only thing the government can do is to appeal to landlords to be merciful of the people that are actually paying rent. They cannot actually force them. Currently, the government is even having problems in taxing this sector. So it becomes hard to give any incentives for landlords to do that. The only way you'll have given incentives is to say, okay, we've reduced the taxation on this, but most of them are already not paying tax. So it made it also hard for the government to give any relief inside this sector. So I don't see any cushioning on rent coming by unless they simply do a law that you can't kick anyone out, which now moves us from a free capital state to a more social organized organization, which most people or in the government would not want to go that route.
Not therefore adopted a revision of the rental income that every tenant is supposed to pay and say, well, we've given you a reprieve on this percentage, so now whoever comes for a renegotiation, whoever tells you they cannot be able to pay rent, then we do also expect you to go and revise all your rents that are getting paid in this financial year.
Simba, that would make sense if I'm paying taxation, because I'll tell you, if you revise your rent, then we'll revise your taxation. I'll give you an example of VAT. Government reduced VAT. Is there any producer or manufacturer or retailer who actually passed that benefit down to the consumer? You realize prices never reduced, prices never came down. because the government is limited to the extent that they can actually help in certain areas, and especially when it comes to rent. The best way the government would have most probably done, if they really wanted to give any help on rent, is we will reimburse you of any rent that you have lost by the measures you have given to your tenants. And for you to do that, you have to do it via KRA. That way, they will have netted more landlords who are not paying taxes into the tax bracket. Because now, if you want to reclaim your the rent waivers you have given to your tenants, then we tell you, okay, go sign up at KRA and lay your claim, and we'll reduce it from your tax. And they will have done it in a more evil way, as in we don't tell you the KRA bit before. We tell you that we'll just reimburse you. Then when it comes time to reimbursing, we tell you we have to reimburse you through KRA. So it would have been an evil way of doing it, but I think in this case, we'll have been pushing the government too far to try and get them to help tenants in terms of rent, unless they actually pumped in money to the tenants themselves to pay the rent. But getting the landlords to do anything was going to be very difficult for the government because there is no mechanism for them to actually do that.
Let's look at these numbers from the Knight Frank survey. They're saying that 70% of tenants, actually here we're talking actually about the businesses themselves. They're saying that they did actually go in for rent holidays and renegotiation of lease terms. Is that not point enough, therefore, for us to say that we should have expected a more solid structure in dealing with rental income in the economy from a taxation perspective this morning?
As I said, if the government wanted to make sure that landlords and building owners continue earning rental income, then they should have given a lifeline to tenants and say to tenants, show us your lease agreement and the account number where you pay your rent, and the government will deposit the money in that account number. That way, they will have gotten account numbers for landlords as well for future taxation. So they could have killed two birds with one stone. But I think, Simba, you are well aware of our fiscal state and status. The government will not be able to afford to do that. And you realize most organizations went for the two things that are the largest costs or largest fixed costs in their P&Ls, which is staff cost and rental cost if you're not in your own building. And they went to renegotiate those, and they went to either people on unpaid leave or cut salaries for that. So you'll realize going forward, and especially for those who might have negotiated lower rents and most of their staff are working from home, going forward, you realize it becomes a trend because an organization will now think, why do we need all this office space? If we have managed to survive 4 months with our staff working from home and we have still achieved the same goals that we wanted to achieve with them in the office. So even for property owners, they need to start realizing that it's a new normal that will start coming up where most organizations will say, yes, we want to renew our lease, but we don't need this much space anymore.
Fantastic. So I want to point you out to the performance of the real estate sector. I mean, you could see last year as well, it was underperforming, and we were talking about a unique aspect. Oversupply of office space was noted as one of the challenges of the sector. Now we are talking about companies realizing, we actually don't need the spaces. So what are we talking about? Are we spelling more doom for the sector chances in 2020, 2021?
The sector was already doomed because prices of office space and rental space in Kenya have been overinflated for a long time. And the bubble might not have burst, but the bubble is slowly deflating. So there are two ways of dealing with the bubble. Either it bursts or it deflates. Yeah, and what is happening to the property sector is a deflation, which started last year. So we can't just blame COVID. COVID has just fastened the process. So you'll realize if you look at a new building that comes up in Upper Hill, which is office space, then you start asking yourself a question, looking at the current economic situation that country is in, which new company is going to come into this building? Which new business is going to come into this building? Who can come and get 2,000 square feet of space anymore? So I think even the guys who are in the property sector need to start thinking of, are we doing building office space in cognizance of the structure of the economy where most people are SMEs, startups, and people are willing to co-share? So you realize guys will do more of co-sharing. If there is more co-sharing office space where you're sharing a boardroom, a reception, a person just gets the office that they need with their visitors' desks. As in you are an SME and you're starting up, you don't need a whole office block for that. You realize there may be more demand for that at reasonable prices. But the only problem is that also we don't get reasonable prices because even the cost of construction and the piece of land were also inflated. And because of that, you realize our prices of our real estate are far beyond what the people that live in the country can actually afford. So yes, 2021, 2022 going forward, we'll continue seeing a deflation in rental yields. They will continue becoming lower. And also as Kenyans start realizing that property and land is not the only available investment vehicle in this universe, you realize demand for it will also start reducing because you can buy an infrastructure bond and earn 12% for the next 20 years. Why would you struggle to manage a block of apartment and get 8%, 7% rental yields with all the stress that comes with it? You'll realize people are now realizing, oh, so it's actually better just to put my money in a financial instrument than to actually go into hard property and development. So with that realization and people awakening to that, you realize the artificial demand that was going into land and property will also start reducing. And as it reduces, that bubble continues to deflate. And woe on those who took expensive loans and bought expensive property hoping to make a kill in the future.
All right, Regina, just in 1 minute before we move over to the next issue this morning, how much of an indicator of the economy's performance it is when you look at it from the perspective of the performance of the real estate sector? How do you relate these two? Would you just say, well, the real estate sector is an isolated area, I don't want to link that to the performance of the economy?
We can all have linkages because if the real estate sector starts deflating the way it is and we get reduced construction around the country, that means there are less asset accumulation that is happening in the economy. If you look at our asset accumulation history, the 10% that we had last year, most of it was into property and into real estate. So it will affect the ability of the economy growing in the future. That's number one. Number two, if construction slows down, you're looking at the informal sector that revolves around these constructions that's happening. So that's income for them that is actually that will actually suffer. So it is actually interlinked. When companies start negotiating lease agreements that are wanting to pay less rent, that's an indicator of the health of the companies. So when you actually look at the economy, you look at some of these things not only in isolation. So you can have a subsector review, but then you need to see how does this subsector affect the rest of the economy.
All right, now a lot of ongoing optimism on the new free trade area agreement between the US and Kenya will not only benefit local farms but also spill over to the African continent. Negotiations on the trade deal currently underway seek to replace the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is set to expire in 2025. The agreement is set to be the first of its kind within the US and sub-Saharan African country. According to Scott Esner, president of the US Africa Business Center, who spoke at the Chamber of Commerce, a Kenya free trade agreement will provide American businesses the certainty they need to continue investing in this growing market. The deal also stands to be a boost to the long-term economic outlook for both countries. He made these remarks on Tuesday when negotiators met virtually to officially begin the US-Kenya trade talks. Let me just leave it there, Reginald, this morning. Talk to me about what your feeling is about this new trade agreement. And then you talk to me about the performance so far from AGOA. Are you happy that now Kenya is actually getting into this trade agreement? And talk to me also from how we need to balance it, because we do know there's the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement that we need to ratify as from 2021. And at this time, we are heavily negotiating for this free trade agreement between Kenya and the US as well. And there are talks between our partners here in the regional bodies that we are in that probably we should have waited or consulted with them further. What is your feeling about this on those three areas?
Any bilateral trade agreement or any free trade agreement is beneficial to an economy. It benefits economies in many ways, in terms of it can promote structural reform, productivity, growth in partner countries. It fosters high levels of skills and wages, stimulating economic growth. So the list goes on and on of the benefits of some of these things. But the major challenge that we have, especially in Africa, is that our trade agreements are more of just removing trade barriers and maybe removing quotas. They don't go down to actually development economics in terms of how do we then boost development in Kenya. Because you are doing a free trade agreement with a country that is superior to yourselves, superior in technology, superior in skills, superior in manufacturing, superior in everything, including the same agriculture that you think you are good at. They're actually superior in it. So you realize, yes, it will open up the US economy, but do we have the technical efficiency and do we have the capacity to actually take advantage of such a trade agreement? No, we do not have. You will realize the goods that will still trade with the US will be very low in terms of volumes compared to what will come from the US to Africa because of the ability to do things at low cost and have superior goods coming. And we all know the African mentality. Everything that is made in the West is better. So if I find rice that is done in the US and rice that is done in Mwea here, most probably I'll start buying rice in the US, but it's going to be cheaper. And for African countries, it is actually better to go from a regional perspective than to go as individuals, as Kenya is actually doing with the US and what they're planning on doing with the UK. And the problem that you'll end up having is what we call a noodle soup problem, where you have too many bilateral agreements, regional trade agreements, that some of the conditions are so overlapping, and one condition, which is a rule of origin, becomes very costly to actually adhere to. So your SMEs and MSAEs might not be able to actually adhere to rule of origin because of the costs of just being able to prove that rule of origin. So if you're going to go into this trade agreement with the US and we do not protect ourselves in terms of protecting our SMEs, our MSMEs, by boosting their capacity to actually export to the US. But it's not, when free trade does not mean that there are no conditions to it. It means that whatever you are trading meets the requirements and the standards that the US expect it to meet. And for you to meet those, it actually becomes a bit expensive for the MSCs and SMEs. In terms of agriculture, they'll start telling you what chemicals you can use and what chemicals you cannot use, what type of fertilizer you can use and what type of fertilizer you cannot use. In terms of carbon emissions in your SMEs, they'll start telling you your carbon emissions need to be this much for this product to be allowed in the US or into the UK. So you realize our capacity then makes us not able to actually take advantage of such trade agreements. So it becomes very doubtful whether free trade agreements or bilateral trade agreements are beneficial to developing countries, where we are only looking at removing non-trade trade barriers and reducing quotas, instead of actually looking at how then do we get development. Because if we have rules of origin which are stringent, then it becomes very difficult to attract foreign direct investment into Kenya, where people come and set up manufacturing and businesses here with the eye of exporting to the US market or the eye of exporting to the UK market. So as we are trading or as we are negotiating these trade agreements, we need to think of the element of how then do we attract foreign direct investments for factories and manufacturers or businesses to set up in Kenya with an eye to be able to manufacture to trade with the US. But if the rules of origin say that the whole thing has to be wholly manufactured, the inputs have to be wholly put in here. So if you set up a Silicon Valley where you are still importing the silicon from India, you're importing the parts from somewhere else and you're just assembling here, that will not be allowed in a free trade agreement or kind of area. So there's a lot of complexity that goes with it. And in my own field, some of these trade agreements are not being done for an economic expediency, but they're being done for a political expediency.
Reginald, I just want to look at the facts that are getting thrown in our face this morning. Well, we do expect that our trade between the two countries is going to improve by $58 billion US. Fine. But if you look at the trade balance, you're still going to find that it's a negative between us and them. Should you think that should have been addressed first? Because that means you're pretty much now bringing in more as opposed to giving them more.
You're correct, Simba, and that's a trade balance that we cannot really address it. It's a fact. They are developed, they are more superior. So our trade agreement needs to look at how do we benefit development-wise from such a trade agreement. This trade agreement needs to go, again, I say, it needs to go beyond the minimal removing trade restrictions and quota restrictions to actually address issues of how do we get development from this? How do we improve our skill sets in this during this trade agreement that we are actually putting with them? And how then do we talk about development? Development talks to foreign direct investment. We don't want your goods. We want you to come and set up factory here so that we create employment. And then you can always re-export whatever you have done back to the US. But the question now becomes, are we a low-cost destination? Africa is not a low-cost destination, unfortunately, because of that. So that's why at a regional level, you have more negotiating power because you're offering a region with 150, 160 to import as much from the US. So I think these agreements need to be looked at a regional perspective. Then African countries will have more negotiating power, and because the US markets will be looking at, okay, this is a market of 200 million people. We are not talking about 40 million people. So if Kenya negotiates by itself, then East Africa Community Trade Protocol says anything that comes from the US is not originating from Kenya, so it cannot enter the other markets. You realize this trade that is expected to grow to 58 billion might not even reach that level at the end of the day.
Now, finally, this morning, the much-awaited 28 billion Nairobi Railway City has started taking shape after the formation of the Railway City Development Authority, a special purpose vehicle. Now, the first phase of the 20-year project is set to change the face of Nairobi Central Business District and is aimed to kick off this year. Nairobi Metropolitan Services Director General Mohammed Badi said that the authority was established in May and formation of an implementation committee was underway. Now, the plan includes building of a new railway station that allows for the integration of BRT and other public transport modes, as well as other commercial developments, including skyscrapers, residential flats, a cultural center, and a museum. Now, the Nairobi railway station area will be developed into an iconic nerve center for the city's multimodal transport system, with a world-class new central station incorporating mixed-use commercial developments, housing, and intermodal facilities. Wow, big words. Big words, beautiful words. Are you happy, Reginald? Is this the magic bullet finally?
I've before I even explain, I just have one question: to what end? To what end? And this is a typical example of what ails African countries. What ails Kenya? And I think I've mentioned it on this show before, that we do a lot of big business budgets and we look at high capital intensive projects, which end up leading us into more debt and debt. And the problem of that is because most of the times we are trying to solve or create solutions for symptoms and not sorting out the problem. Yeah, Nairobi's transport problem is not a problem on its own. It's a symptom of a lot of rural to urban migration, which itself is a symptom of creating rural poverty or rural unemployment because of creating budgets that ignore the rural areas and just think of metropolitan or urban areas. So instead of fixing or coming up with solutions, all this money they will use for this railway city and wherever they will borrow it from, if it could go to improve the number of people that have piped water in the city, then we are making proper goals to actually move people from poverty. This railway city will not uplift people from poverty. It will, yes, add to GDP because it's an output, it's construction and everything. But then we still have that problem of where growth is not translating to poverty reduction because the methods we're trying to use are just for optics. Yeah, you have this world-class railway station and everything, but people next to it are living in utter poverty. And I think until African governments, until the Kenyan government sits down and say, our agenda is poverty reduction, then you will stop some of these nonsensical projects that we keep on doing, wasting a lot of money, instead of actually creating employment, increasing people's incomes, and lifting people out of poverty.
Finally, therefore, Reginald, in just 1 minute, I mean, yes, even as you talk about eradicating poverty and moving people out of this, is that you got to talk about the enablers as well. Would you consider this project an enabler for that?
No, it's not an enabler because it's treating a symptom and not going to the root problem. The root problem is the rural to urban migration. How do we stop rural to urban migration by building a railway city? You are just creating more jobs in the urban center and moving more people to that urban center. They are going to be working on minimal wage, so they cannot afford your houses in your Kileleshwa. They will continue crowding the slums, and your poor people and the congestion in the city continues. We do not have, the Nairobi metropolitan does not have capacity for more than 3 million people, 4 million people. If this increase to 5 million people in the next 2-3 years, then this city infrastructure will actually literally crumble. Instead, the government should have said, okay, we have a problem of rural to urban migration. How do we create sufficient employment in the rural areas, in the agricultural areas, in the counties? How do we devolve industrialization and manufacturing so that we are not spending a lot of money building 10-lane roads in Nairobi because everyone wants to come to the city? I'll give you an example. Most countries, even if you go to South Africa, you go to the US, you go to different countries in the world, there are people that have never left the city that they were born in. There are people that have never gone to New York. There are people that have never gone to Washington. Why? Because they have created employment where people are. But our job here in Kenya is to create employment in Nairobi. Then we start complaining there's congestion in Nairobi, so we need to build wider roads. And now this thing that they're calling a railway worldwide something city, whatever you call it, it's all because we keep on trying to treat symptoms because they are bigger projects. They will make a more glamoring advert if you are seeking re-employment, or in terms of legacy, you say, look at this thing that I left. But has that thing actually removed people from poverty? All these years, all these 10 years of economic growth in Kenya, have we seen people, thousands of people or millions of people being uplifted from poverty? No, because we are actually not creating employment. We are not reducing income poverty in the country. We are just spending a lot of money in the name of enablers, which are actually not uplifting people from poverty. So policymakers need to sit down and say, we did a railway. How much poverty reduction did that help? Did it increase incomes? No. Then we sit down and say, let's rethink our strategy of economic growth, because if economic growth does not uplift people from poverty, then it is useless growth.
Reginald, General Badi would not like you this morning.
He would actually love me, because I'm giving him tips of, instead of spending money on Cabro in Nairobi CBD, 70% of the people in this country don't have access to piped water. If General Mbadi had said my first 100 days is to increase from the people that have piped water from 30% to 50%, then he will have started doing the right thing in the right direction. We don't eat Cabro, we don't dig Cabro. Most of us will never walk on that Cabro because we don't want to be in the CBD because there's insecurity in the CBD. So I think it's just a misprioritization and a lot of optics that our government is doing, which does not help people come out of poverty.
Reginald, we'll leave it there this morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Exactly how we end the show today, this morning as well. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiang, and I'll take Reginald back to when he joined us this morning on Metropole TV, YouTube, of course, all your social media platforms as well. And I know those messages have come in, and I will give you the response of Reginald this morning when you asked him to tell you what his growth number is for the economy in 2020, 2021. That coming to you too shortly. Thank you very much for joining us.